Contested custody cases. Obviously, I usually advise my clients when they come in that depending upon the amount of contestedness of the case, that it's going to be a costly case. But there are ways to keep costs down. And again, I certainly being cost effective is one of the things that makes a client a happy client. Discuss with your client options within the court system and the pros and cons of each option. What does the client need? What's the client looking for? But also, what are the costs involved? Again, discussing case strategy. I mean, obviously this is vital to any case we're dealing with. You must discuss strategy. Again, I think it's important, and a lot of times when clients come in with me, I have them write down, whether they be property issues or custody issues, write down the goals of your case. If you could have everything you want, what do you want out of this case? So that I'm not missing something, so that we don't get 3 months into the case and they say, oh my God, this is a huge contested custody case and I don't have a GAL, or there's abuse but I didn't know about it, or they're wanting to be very, very aggressive and I haven't set the groundwork in order to let the case proceed that way. So certainly I think having your client writing down the goals and then discussing the best way to reach them. Now, utilizing these resources within the court system certainly are ways to help you be successful in meeting those goals if applicable. Again, what is the problem if it is a contested custody case? Is there a problem? Or is it just that these two people can't get along, or I want to hurt you because we're in a divorce and I don't want you to have the children? You know, if there is a true and legitimate problem, again, how do we address it? What's the best way to address it? What's the best way to bring it to the court's attention? If it's just, I'm vindictive and I want to get back at somebody, then again, talking about the cost-benefit analysis or going down that path, you may not need to utilize any of these resources. Again, costs. I think costs are extremely important. Again, happy clients seeing what they can afford and making the best decisions for your client's case. That's very, very important. And again, we all know, those of us that do practice family law or have dabbled in it, we all know what the costs are associated with some of these different resources. Some of them are extremely expensive. Psychological evaluations. I mean, if you get really down into the nitty-gritty specifics and you're doing all these motions and you're having all these drug tests and everything like that, again, can get very costly, and you need to tell your client up front, is this something that you really, is this a path you want to go down? Is this something you really want to pursue? And ultimately, what are we going to get out of it? Are we going to end up with 50-50 custody if you do a drug test and it comes out negative? Are you going to make all these accusations and then we find out, you know, nothing's wrong, and then you have a credibility problem with the judge? Again, things to keep in mind. With regard to the parenting class, obviously we all know that's the first thing you get when you file a case or your client is served with papers in a dissolution case. It's required by the court. Obviously, it's just a brief introduction to parents about what's going to go on with the court system. Certainly they give them some tools and resources with which to deal with during their divorce. Mediation. It's not required in every court. Certainly there's kind of a move that be the case, that be the first step unless you opt out of it. But at this point it's not required, and so it's important to know what courthouses require it and what courthouses don't require it. Guardian ad litem, they are an attorney for the children. To get a GAL appointed, certainly if there's allegations of abuse, a GAL must be appointed in a case. If there's a need based on other reasons, even if it's just that the custody is contested and you can plead your case to the judge that you need to utilize a GAL, it's up to the judge's discretion. The functions of the GAL, certainly, again, this is not a exhaustive list, but they get in and they investigate the case. They meet with everybody. They have the utility to actually meet with mom, meet with dad, meet with the kids, sometimes meet with mom and the kids, dad and the kids, those types of things. They get in there and they can really do the groundwork, the stuff that the judge can't get in and do, the stuff that testimony may be contradictory, so they can actually get in there and meet these people, get to know their personalities. Certainly with the GAL, they work out a temporary and usually a final visitation schedule and custody plan, and especially if tensions are running high early on in your case and you can't get in on a PDL, certainly sometimes a GAL can get in there and kind of do a little mediation, quote unquote, and get them a temporary custody plan so that both parents are seeing these kids. Social worker or domestic relations services, the functions of the social worker and domestic relations services, again, I think what's important is in some cases the GAL and these social workers perform a semi-similar function. And certainly when you can't afford a GAL, I think that I think these are of great utility, and in some cases they're of better utility than the GAL. But what they do, and again this is not an exhaustive list, is potentially supervised visits, reunification of the parties, or let's say you're dealing with a paternity case and dad's never met child but has brought a paternity suit. Certainly they're very good about getting the child and dad, and I just use that for an example, but child and dad reunified, slowly introduce them back into one another's lives. So certainly they're of great utility with regard to that, because that takes time. We all know that. They're utilized, they don't have nearly as much quote-unquote power as the GAL, but they certainly set up a visitation schedule both on a temporary basis and a permanent basis. Certainly they suggest it, and I think one of their best functions is for parents that aren't completely on opposite sides. They're certainly great at mediating what is the final parenting plan, or hey, let's work through a parenting plan, and getting that parenting plan completed where parents actually are sitting in the same room and actually deciding making those decisions together with somebody who's not an attorney, with the person that's not their attorney. So they don't have their attorney whispering in their ear on either side. They're just sitting there and telling the other party, this is actually what I want, here's where I am, here's where you are, can we meet somewhere in the middle? Counseling and therapy can be recommended by the GAL or social worker, or it can just be elective. And keep in mind, in some cases, it may not be family counseling. It might be dad needs counseling. It might be mom needs counseling. It might be, hey, kids are going through a hard time. Kids need counseling. So keep in mind that there's different types of counseling that might be applicable to your case. Supervised visitation, certainly court-ordered or court-recommended. Who's going to recommend supervised visitation? Well, clearly not the other party in the case. Certainly they put that in the pleadings, and it's alleged that one party might need supervised visitation over the other. However, the judge, or again, if you have a GAL or a social worker appointed in your case, they're going to be the ones recommending it to the judge, and ultimately the judge is going to be ordered whether or not, quote-unquote, supervised visitation is going to happen. And that brings me to the exchange center. Court recommended and court ordered. Primarily, who's going to recommend it? Not just opposing party. It's going to be, GAL, social worker, judge, something like that. The problems with these places, which again, great utility, but the problem associated with them is there's only certain times when supervised visits actually happen, and only certain days. So you're very limited. I mean, if a GAL or if the judge says, hey, I want such and such to have quite a bit of time, but I do want it at this point to be supervised for whatever reason, you're not going to be able to use a court service because they just don't have the amount of time or availability for you to do that. Parent coordinators, this is kind of a new and budding thing. They're utilized after the case. Cases where the parties just can't seem to agree, although the words are the same on the page, they just have a different interpretation. That's a good place for a parent coordinator. What that does is it keeps costs down, and it keeps them from seeing the judge, every 6 months, every year, every 2 years, those types of things. And again, we're not talking about to change child support or those types of things. We're talking about interpretations that deal with custody and co-parenting with your children. Other useful tools and resources for a contested custody case, I'm not going to go into depth, but home study, if applicable, not necessarily always applicable, reunification meetings, we talked about those, psychological evaluations, custody evaluations, an uncontested custody case. Some of the services that you utilize that I've just talked about can be very helpful in an uncontested custody case. And I thank you guys for your time.